Yesterday, we're going to quickly read over the Mishnah on the bottom of Samches on the base, just because the Gemara has a very detailed um, review of the Mishnah. It goes through each one and limits or changes it a little, so it's important to remember the details. So Moicher Sasada, and so it's like the Mishnah right on the bottom of the Yom of Samches on the base. Moicher Sasada Machas Avonim Shem L'Tzarcha. Someone who sells a field sells along with it the stones that are for the purpose of the field. We're going to see a machlokes in the Gemara, which is going to go through the Gemara about what these avanim are for. Either they're there to hold down the tfuah, or it means it shouldn't blow away, I guess, or to use as borders for the field. The reeds in the vineyard that are for the purpose of the field, as the Gemara is going to explain, to hold up the vines. The tfuah, the grain that is still attached to the ground. He also sells, these are all things that we say when you sell the field, you also sell this as well. The gathering, the patch of reeds, of I guess bamboo, that's less than a base roiv. It doesn't have a chashivas on its own. It's sold together with the field. A hut that's not plastered. A carob tree that's not yet old enough to be grafted. When they would be mature, they would graft them. So this is a sign that it wasn't yet mature. There's psula sashikma, a young sycamore tree. All these things don't have a chashivas. They're not mechubal lekarka, or they are mechubal lekarka, or they're not kavua bekarka, but they're sold along with the field. These are all things that don't have a chashivas on their own, or else they're still attached to the field. You don't sell the avanim that are not needed for the field. They have the person will take them along with him wherever he goes, the seller. And not the reeds that are not used for the vineyard. And when you sell a field, you don't sell the grain that was already cut from the ground. He's ready to, the seller is ready to take it away. He doesn't intend to sell that. But if he says everything that's included, that's inside of it, then he means whatever's there. So even if there are things that normally would not be sold together with the karka, but if he says kol masha b'saycha, it's included. But whether he said that lashon or not, although we said that the things that were mentioned in the Mishnah, that they're included if you say kol masha b'saycha, but even if he says kol masha b'saycha, it does include it does not include the separate patch of reeds. That's a base river. That's a chashva thing on its own. It's identified as separate from this field. It's a separate thing, so it's not included. The loy as hashomira sheyasuya b'tet, and not a fully functioning watchman's hut. That's not part of the field. As well as not the mature carob tree and sycamore tree. What does it mean when we said right at the beginning of the Mishnah that when you sell a field, you sell also the stones that are used for the field? In Bava they explained it, like we said, avanim that we used to hold down the tfuah that it shouldn't blow away. Ula has a different pshat. Avanim hasduros together. It's talking about avanim stones. He had you can imagine like an old stone wall that wasn't cemented together. So we had them all arranged that they're ready to be used. He has a pile of bricks essentially that's ready to be used for a fence. So they're clearly intended to be part of the field. It's something that every field has a fence. So I guess the person who arranged it is he piled them up in an arrangement in a neat pile So it's clearly intended to be used together with the field. In fact, together. Rav Chia has learned, we have from Rav Chia that he had heard in a brisa that it's talking about just avanim that are piled up. They don't have to be arranged. So Gemara, avanim. So Gemara tzuburas hava avanim tzuburas legader tani hava avanim tzuburas legader tani seduras. So Gemara says no, you have to learn it. That what Rav Chia really was saying is sturis, not tzuburas, because tzuburas is inaccurate. Tzuburas is not sufficiently prepared to be used together with the field. So Hacha Tirgmu Avni Da'ach. In Bavel, they use the Targum, where they use the first pshat in the Gemara. That when we say that the Avanim are sold together with the field, it's talking about Avanim that were used to weigh down the Tvua. The Rameir, so the Gemara, before we see this, we have to see the Rashbam, which is the second narrow line. Rameir da Amar Perak HaMeicher Sasvina. Macha Keren, Machan Tashmishe Keren. That when you sell a vineyard, you also sell the things that are used by the vineyard. We see that Rameir generally he's chaylik on the Rabbanan. He disagrees with the Rabbanan. Even those tashmishin that are not sold, the Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan hold that they're not sold because they're not so set to be used with the vineyard. Rameir holds they are. In all of the different things that are used with either with a vineyard or with a field that we learned in our Mishnah, what are they talking about? We're going to go straight through all the cases of the Mishnah and try to make sure that it works to explain it both according to Reb Meir and according to the Rabbanan. That Reb Meir generally is on the side of the buyer. He says that more is considered to be included with the sale, and the Rabbanan hold less is sold. They favor the seller. So now the Gemara is going to start with our first case. So we said that we understood the first case to be talking about Avni Da'achva, the stones that are used to hold down the wheat. L'ramei the misak afagav michta. According to Rameir, who favors the buyer, he says as long as the stones were prepared, they were masuk and they were prepared for use. Afagav michta, even though they were not brought into the field to be used, even though they're not placed in the field. The Rabbanan who the michtan, but according to Rabbanan, it has to be bedafka. It was placed in the field. Because according to the Rabbanan, we generally favor the seller in this type of question. In Ulud Pshat, that he didn't learn, like we just said, that we would tergumu achwa, that we're talking about stones used to weigh down wheat. But he holds that the stones were used to make a fence. The Rameir, the Misak. And according to Rameir, it's talking about that you had already prepared the stones to be used. Avagav doli sidron, even though you didn't pile them together. The Rabbanan who the sidron. According to Rabbanan, sounds like our Mishnah is, or that Bryce that we said, is Avanim Sturis, that's the Rabbanan. They say that it has to be Mesuder. Rameir would hold doesn't have to be Mesuder as long as they're, I guess, Tziburis, as long as they're prepared for use. The next case another case of the Mishnah was the Zakanim Shebekam Shem Lutzarcha. Another case where something is sold along with the field is the reeds of a vineyard that are used for the vineyard. Kanim Maya Viditayu. The Gemara asks, what use are kanim in a vineyard? Kanim Hamchulakim, smooth sticks, Shemabid and Tachasak Fanim, that you place underneath the vines to hold them up. Lira Meir, according to Rameir, who favors the buyer, he says, Kanim Hamchulakim, as long as Rameir the Mashpian. Afagav Deloy Mukman, according to Rameir, as long as they were smoothed off, even though they were not placed directly underneath the vines, as long as they're prepared enough, that's enough to make it part of the vineyard and it's sold to the buyer with the sale. But Rabbanan do mukman. According to Rabbanan, that they have a higher standard for it to be included in the sale. It has to be that it was actually placed in the field underneath the vines. We said the tfuah that is attached to the ground is sold along. The Gemara says, even though it already reached its full growth, so it's ready to be harvested, it's still considered to be part of the sale until it's actually cut from the ground. The Gemara is not machalik over here between Rameh and the Rabbanan. I don't know if this is intended. You'd have to look at the Rishonim to see if this is intended to be a chiluk that according to Reb Meir, if it's matoy lemechza, even if it's matoy lemechza, even if it's ready to be cut, it's still considered to be part of the sale, and the Rabbanan disagree. It seems the Gemara seems to be saying that even the Rabbanan agree, that everyone agrees in this case. We said a patch of reeds, of stalks, that is less than a base raiva, that's sold in the field. The Gemara says even though they're strong, they're very healthy, good growing stalks or kanim, they're still going to be, as long as they're less than a base raiva, they're going to be sold along with the field. A hut that's not covered with, it's not plastered, but it says it's still sold along. Since it's not plastered, it's not so finished, it's not so significant, so therefore it's, even if it's not attached to the ground with stakes, it's still considered to be sold. We said the immature carob tree and the sycamore tree, they're both sold along with the field. So even though they're strong, since they're immature, they don't have their own chashivas, they don't have their own importance, and therefore they're sold along with the field. So then the Mishnah flipped over, right? The first section of the Mishnah was saying the things that are sold along, and then at the second part of the Mishnah we said the things that are not sold along with the field. So we said, you don't sell the stones that are not intended for the purpose of the field. Lira Meir, so we say, according to Meir, we said who favors the buyer, the loy masak, as long as they were not prepared. The Rabbanan, the loy michten. The Rabbanan would say it would be, it's as even if it's misaknan, if it's loy michten, it would not be sold. Again, because the Rabbanan favor the seller. So they say there's a higher standard in order for it to be included in the.
This is the ones. This for first explaining the things that are included, right?
No, we're
explaining what they.
Yeah,
it's not
sold. Right, the things that are not included, correct?
That are not included, all right.
Right. So now the Rabbanan are going to be explaining, according to us, it's not included, even if it's only loy mechsan, even though it was already mesukan, that's not going to be enough to include it in the sale. And according to Ula, who says we're not talking about avanim used to hold down the wheat, but rather that avanim that are used to arrange as a border. The Rameh will be that it wasn't prepared at all. And according to Rabbanan, it has to be, in order to, according to Rabbanan, it's just that as long as it's not masudar, even if it's masukan, it's still not going to be included in the sale. Also, we don't include in the sale the reeds in a vineyard that are not used for this vineyard. The Rameir, the loy mashlian, according to the Rameir, he's talking about that they were not smoothed out. The Rabbanan, the loy mukman, according to Rabbanan, it's talking about that they were not placed, even if they're not placed underneath the vines, that's enough to get it out of the sale. We don't include the tvua, the grain that was already cut off from the ground. Says, even though it's still in the phase where it has to be dried out, it's not yet ready to be harvested, it's not ready to be collected, that's still going to be considered part of the it's still going to be that it's not part of the field and it's not sold with the field. And not a patch of konim, of reeds, that is a base raiva. So the ketini, even though it's weak, it's still going to be if it's more than a base raiva, it's still considered to be chashav. It's not so. It's not just the chitz sakanim. Anything that's chashav on its own, like psamim. Psamim are very valuable. Spices are valuable. So therefore, they have their own chashivas, and they're not sold with the karka. If it has its own name, it's not considered to be sold with it. He gives an example. If someone calls this Maishi's rose bush, so that means that it's not part of the field. It's considered to be an entity on its own. And not a hut that was plastered with tit on the outside. Even though it's attached to the ground, since it's a suya betit, it doesn't make it sold together with the property because it has its own chashivas. It's like a tent. Tent is meant to be moved away. Boy, Rebbe Loza. I shouldn't say it's meant to be moved away. It's a separate thing. It has its own purpose, just like a rose bush, just like anything else that we've mentioned before. That even though it's part of the ground and even attached to the ground, it's still considered to be a separate thing. Boy, Rebbe Loza. This is talking about they had the frame around the door that was used. It was meant to stop the door from going through the doorway. So if it's attached to the house, so certainly it's sold with the house. Because it's attached. It's attached with pieces of wood, with pegs. So those are removable. What's it then? Do we say that it's since it's removable, the person does not sell it with the house, he'll bring it along with him to his next house? Or do we say, no, it's kavua, it's not intended to be moved, and therefore it's not so. Boy Rav Zera, take. Well, it says we don't have an answer. Boy Rav Zera. Rav Zera says, if you say that even that these doorstops that are held on with pegs are considered to be, if we would answer the first question, they are consoled with the house. Rav Zera asked another question. You have this by windows. Now, windows don't open and close, so the frames around them are just meant to make it pretty. Do we say that's only by a doorstop which has a function? So then it's considered to be sold part of the house. But this is just lanoi. The person will say, the new owners will probably throw it out. They don't like my style. So it's not sold with the house. Lanoi ba'amadu avid. It's just made for beauty. Since it's attached, it doesn't make a difference. The person's not going to go to the bother of taking it off. If you think about it, this is a very common thing. If anyone has ever bought or sold a house, there's always the question, is a chandelier, for example, considered to be part of the house? What if you have obviously the elaborate chandeliers are considered to be separate. Then you have like the $5 Home Depot light fixture is considered part of the house. Then you have the things that are in between. To what extent is it linoy? What extent is it for function? So that's what the Gemara's question really is talking about. Boy revere me. They used to have these pieces of wood that they would put underneath the legs of a bed, of a door, of a bed frame, so that they wouldn't get rotten from being exposed to the ground. If they're attached to the bed, and when you pick up the bed, they come with them. The bed is certainly metaltalin, and if they're attached to the bed, then they're also metaltalin. They're not selling. But where they're attached to the ground, so the question is, the person could pick them up. They're not picked up automatically with the bed. Do you say that they're left there for the next person to bring a bed, or do you say the person who has the bed, the person he's going to take it with him because it's probably that's what he'll use it in his new house? So the Gemara take. The Gemara continues. We said that these kind of trees, the carob tree, a mature carob tree, and a mature sycamore tree are very chashuv, very important, and therefore they are certainly not sold when someone sells their sada. Where does this come from? Meaning, so how do you know to exclude something that's chashuv? So the Gemara says, the sada of Ephron that was in the Gemara, the pasuk continues. So the pasuk is telling you that everything that's around that's surrounded by this gevul. Only those things, what's sold together with the field, that which is included only by saying what the boundaries are. That excludes something like the kruv and the what's it called again? Sikma, that are entities on their own. They have chashivas on their own, and therefore they're not sold with the field. An additional thing you see from this pasuk is that when you buy a field, he said also there's a gulis, that in the sale that Ephron was making to Avram, he also included those borders. So we've mentioned a number of times in different contexts that they used to have borders between sadas. They'd have a raised mound, a raised hump that would go between the two sadas. People would often use it as a Rosh Hashanah to walk, so they wouldn't walk through the sadas. So that was included as part of the field. Even like I said, it happens to be that it would often give a right of way to the public to walk there, but it still remained the property of the owner, of the person who bought the field. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hayman the Mizvan Ara Lechabre, someone who sells land to his friend, Sarach Lemichtav Le Kanilach Diklin Vitalin Behutzin Vitzitzin. He should write that I'm selling you all of the diklin, which are the palm trees, and the talon are the young trees, and the hutzin or tzitzin are different kinds, all different kinds of palm trees. Even though if he hasn't written this, they're also kanui, because like we said, you include the trees that are inside of the field. Even so, the Rashbam says an interesting thing. He says it makes the shtar better. He says in case you come to a not so knowledgeable bezdin, that doesn't know the halacha, that these trees are sold along with the field, if you have it in the shtar, it will point them in the right direction about how to pass it. That's why it's best to put it in. Now, we're going to be talking now about a specific thing, which a little bit, I don't really understand how it doesn't contradict what we just said. We just said that the Rashbam said that the different palm trees are included, but we're now saying, I guess the palms, everything except for the kruv and the sikma are normally included. But palm trees are considered more chashuv than the average tree, and they were not necessarily considered to be part of a sale. So a person had the ability. Of course, a person could contract for whatever they want to sell what they want. So we're going to talk about over here people who made specific provisions regarding a deca or a decalim. So amalei aravidikli. If someone said, "I'm selling you this land plus some palm trees," chazini islay dikli yavle tre dikli. If the seller, in addition to this field, has 2 palm trees, he has to give him 2 palm trees. Be less lay. But if he doesn't have them, zavanle trade dikli. He has to go buy 2 dikli to give to him in order that he fulfills his requirements. Now, the Rashbam says that that this is not really, a person can't sell something that he doesn't have. but this is it's considered to be he should be a baramana. He should say he should go buy the house. He shouldn't be considered someone who doesn't fulfill his words. He should go buy the trees, the palm trees, and sell and give them over. If this seller does have palm trees, but they're meshubed to someone else, if there's someone else who has a lien on them, parakle tradically, he has to pay up the liens so that the palm trees can be given over free of any lien. That was the first lashon where he said aravidically. I'm selling you this land is sada plus the column. Aravidically, if he says I'm selling you this land together with palms, meaning with its palms, chazin and isbeidikli yavle. If there are the column on it, then he gives them to them. He gives the column. Bilav mekach taisu. If there are no the column, then he said, I'm selling you a sada with the column, and there were no the column. So it's a mekach tais. It was sold under false pretenses, and the whole sale is unwound. If he said a third lashon, arabedically, if he said a land that you can grow the column on it, Leslie dickley, then he gets nothing. It means he just said, I'm selling you land, just that it's able to grow the column. If he says the chazia ledickley, if he says that it's capable of being sold for the column, I'm sorry, that's because what he means to say is the chazia ledickley kamle. What he's trying to tell him is that you could grow the column on it. Amalei lebar midikla planya. What if the seller said, I'm selling you this land, but I'm excluding this decal, this palm tree, chazinin. Idikla tavahu shir shire. If it's taka, a good decal, so the seller taka that's what he was doing. He was saying, I'm selling you this field, but I have one palm tree that I'm attached to. It's a good decal. I don't want to give it up. Idikla bishahu, but if it's a very shvacha decal, kol shechein hanach. He's saying, I'm not selling that to you. That means what he's trying to say is I'm not selling you even that worst one, and he's telling you, I'm selling you the whole field, but I'm not selling you any of the color. Amalei lebar mi inli, mi only. If he said I'm selling it to you, but I'm excluding trees. So like we said, the column are considered to be separate from trees. They have a separate chashivas of their own. So if there are trees, then that's what he's doing. He's excluding the trees on this land. If all he has is the column, then it means to say it's sold without labarmi dikli, without the column, even though decal is often called decal, and ilni and other trees are called ilni, but sometimes you'll call a decal ilni. So you said I'm excluding the trees. In this case, if all he had was decal, obviously that's what he's referring to. Islay gufni, as well as the same thing would be if he has only vines for grapevines. Normally, you don't consider grapevines trees, but he said except for the trees in this case, and that's all he has. So he means labarmi gufni. Ilni v'gufni. If he has both trees and vines, labarmi ilni. Then obviously what he's referring to is the actual trees. He said ilni, he means ilni. He doesn't mean vineyards unless you're forced to that conclusion. Ilni v'dikli, if he has trees and decal, lavarmi ilni. Again, he was referring to the trees. Gufni v'dikli, what if the person said, I'm selling you except for trees, but he doesn't have trees, but he does have both vines and palms, labarmi gufni. The vines are more often called trees. So when he said, I'm excluding the trees, what he means to say in this case, we assume what he means to say is except for the vines, and not that the column, like we said, the column are very chashiv on their own. They're less often called trees. Okay, we're going to stop over here, and Rez Hashem will continue tomorrow at 7:10, because I am going to still be here in. I'm going to still be here in.